Just going to give you a quick overview, and I'm trying to, there we go. Today we'll be talking about fats, and I'll have the recording sent out. I did not send out Friday's recording yet, so I'll send that together with our material for today. But we have a lot to dig into. I have included the slides for you today instead of a handout because I thought that might be a little bit more helpful with getting some more details. Just on a lot of the slides, I included a good bit of information. I try not to do that, but today I needed to include a good bit for you versus making separate handouts. And I also included the references section. If you're someone who likes to just dig in and get into the research and read the studies yourself, you are welcome to do that. So I've put that on 2 separate slides at the end, and you can go back and refer to some of the studies that I've mentioned. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And again, if you have any questions about this presentation, please go ahead and just feel free to email me afterwards, and we'll incorporate that into either Wednesday or Friday discussion. I'm hoping it's going to be a fun week for us. Fat is another one of those controversial topics, so we'll just jump right in. Let's see. Okay. So we're talking about nourishing fats, and I like to use the term nourishing when it refers to fats because I grew up in the era of a fat-free craze. As I was coming of age, fat was the enemy, and I did everything in my power to stay away from it and really prided myself on having a fat intake of no more than 5 grams a day. And I will just say personally that just wreaked havoc with my health, and it took me a long time to recover. I think it's one of the reasons I've suffered with a lot of hormonal imbalances. I had a lot of acne and hair loss, and I really feel like it just disrupted my metabolism a lot because I did a lot of carbohydrates, so I just didn't eat much fat. So kind of coming back around to a balanced perspective of everything, we know that nourishing fat intake is important these are 4 just basic reasons. There's others, but it's part of our cell membrane structure. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we talk about some specific types of fats. But in that membrane, which is like the envelope around our cells, it's made of many fats. And so as our membranes develop and those fats are put in there, what types of fats we add to our cell membranes are going to be very important because they're going to influence things like the second icon here, our cognitive function, very influenced by fat intake, our inflammatory process, and immunity. So fat has a much higher role other than the fact that it just tastes good. Again, it helps with our immune health, and part of that is because of absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, but also its influence upon inflammation as well. But we need fat to help us digest and absorb our fat-soluble vitamins, and those would be primarily your vitamins A, which would include beta-carotene, derivatives of that, and vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K, K1 and K2. So those need fats to be transported, and then our body actually stores those vitamins in our fat as well. So also cognitive function is highly, again, influenced by fat. Fat increases our satiety, helps us feel full. So if we have a meal that's just carbohydrates and protein, sometimes we don't feel as full as we need to be. And may lend to overeating versus having some fat intake with our meal can help us feel more satiated. So that's an important thing. Fat transports flavor as well. Just enjoying food, we need fat to help us enjoy the taste of it. Adds a creaminess, a good mouthfeel. And I've already mentioned fat-soluble vitamin storage, but also energy. So fat functions as an important way for our body to store energy. That's how we survive. We know that being over fat can be a problem, but so can being under fat. If our body doesn't have that reserve, if we were to have an illness or condition where we could not access food, we need fat to be able to burn that for energy, to receive energy. Fat is so demonized. I'm just going to use the word again, but just digging into some of the studies primarily related to cardiovascular health, because that's a lot of the reason that we say fat's bad. We should stay away from that. I have a lot of clients who come to me and say, hey, I've been told to eat only this amount of fat or no fat at all. And they are still struggling with a lot of health problems. And primarily they were told to stay away from fat because of their cholesterol levels. So one big meta-analysis of cohort studies that was done recently is a good indication that total fat, saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat, which we'll talk about those different types of fat soon, none of those were associated with a risk of cardiovascular disease, which is really mind-blowing. We do see that a higher trans fat intake is associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, and that happens in a dose-response fashion. So the more trans fat we have, the more risk of cardiovascular disease. And a trans fat would be, you may know that is a hydrogenated oil. Trans fats can occur through cooking, but primarily we see it through hydrogenated oils, partially hydrogenated soybean oils, things like that. We know our body looks at it and says, I don't know what to do with this. I don't recognize this. It's pretty foreign to me. I'm going to store it like I would store a saturated fat. But we also see a very nice cardioprotective effect of PUFAs, which are polyunsaturated fatty acids, in studies that were followed up for more than 10 years. So we're going to break these concepts down of what are the polyunsaturated fatty acids, but just kind of overall where I'm coming from is that fat intake does not necessarily correlate with increased risk of cardiovascular disease. There are some things that do, which includes inflammation and oxidative stress. Those are terms we've already brought up over the past few weeks as we've studied. But again, inflammation, oxidative stress, huge reason that we need to be concerned about our cardiovascular health if we have a high level of those in the body. So when it comes to fats, I'm going to break these down to just the very basics. Two types of fats to begin with, saturated and unsaturated fat. The saturated fats, the reason it's called saturated is that in the chemical form of it, there are no double bonds. So it's not going to bend. Basically, the double bonds allow things to kind of bend, which means that those fats are solid at room temperature. Primarily, we think of animal fats like lard or chicken fat or the fat that you see around the edge of a steak, but also some plant-based fats such as palm oil and coconut oil. Now, coconut oil does have a melting point where it's going to melt at a certain degree. So if you've ever had a solid jar of coconut oil and then all of a sudden you look in your pantry as it becomes spring and summer and you think, what happened to my coconut oil? It's now yellow and liquidy. Coconut oil does melt at a certain point. But primarily saturated fats come from animals. Unsaturated fats tend to be more plant-based. They may have one or more double bonds in that chemical structure. If it just has one double bond, it's called a monounsaturated fat. But if it has two or more double bonds, then it's a polyunsaturated fat. Poly means many. So the main types of these polyunsaturated fats, or those PUFAs that I mentioned earlier, are your omega-3 and omega-6 fats. And I know you've heard these terms, omega-3 and omega-6. We're going to talk a little bit more about these and a little bit later on in the presentation, and the ratio that we need and how much and that kind of thing. But those are the main types. And these fats are liquid at room temperature. Any of the unsaturated are going to be liquid. If we put them in the refrigerator, they make it a little bit cloudy. But qualities of a nourishing fat that I include when I think about what kind of fats do we need. Fats that are minimally refined. They haven't been heat treated. They have not been processed with something called hexane or another chemical to get the fat out of the original substance. They've been cold pressed. In other words, they're not heat treated to get that oil out of there. I don't want to heat fat up too high because it's going to change the structure of the fat and become problematic for the body. They will be organic or non-GMO. Non-GMO is, organic foods are always non-GMO, but not all non-GMOs are organic. So there's a little bit of a distinction there. But as we know that many of the fats can be genetically modified. I'm going to give the example of a soybean oil, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, that we need to be avoiding. And then fats, we know that we need to store in dark glass bottles or in a cool place. a lot of times I put nuts and seeds in the freezer because they can easily go rancid. They can go bad. These are just some examples of nourishing fats. That would include avocados, avocado oil. I love using avocados. We're going to use them in our creamy guacamole this week. Great source of things like glutathione, which is our antioxidant that's so potent, but good source of monounsaturated fatty acids. Just lots of nourishing qualities for avocados. I cook with avocado oil the most, and I mentioned that already, I think, to you in a previous lesson, but avocado oil is pretty easy to find now in dark glass bottles, and I'll show you some in the kitchen when we're in there on Wednesday. It is comparable in my mind to olive oil, maybe not quite the many compounds, but it is very difficult to find a high quality olive oil that's not been mixed with something else or tampered with. Olive oil itself is something I could probably talk about for a long time, so I'm just not going to go there too much. But I do like to use avocado oil. And it can also withstand a fairly high smoke point. So smoke point is the point at which the fat's going to kind of change structure a little bit. You'll see it's kind of smoking on the pan. Avocado oil can go higher than many other oils. Pecans, nice source of some fats. Peanuts, sesame seeds, and tahini. Tahini is what you would find in a hummus, the ground up sesame seed. Almonds, pecans, and walnuts. Sunflower seeds, sometimes sunflower seed oil. It's pretty high in omega-6s, which we'll talk about in a minute, but olive and extra virgin olive oil, if you can get a good quality olive oil. Coconut oil, butter, or ghee. There's a little bit of a controversy with that, sometimes with dairy, but I do use some butter in my family. Ghee is a little bit more processed. It's clarified butter, so that you're removing the milk proteins for the most part, and that can also withstand a higher smoke point. Also has a good source of something called butyrate in there, which helps feed our intestinal bacteria. So that can be another good property of ghee. Flaxseed or flaxseed oil, chia seeds, hemp seeds, Brazil nuts, pumpkin seeds, pistachios. These are all examples of good nourishing fats. And I like to include a wide variety of fats and oils in my diet and my family's food plan. I don't just choose one thing and think, well, if I just eat that and that's all I need. I really think we need a good variety. We need some omega-6s, we need some omega-3s. I'll talk about the ratio in a minute, but I just want to choose a wide variety. We know that fats and oils can break down in heat, light, and oxygen. So that's why it's important for you to store oils in a dark glass container or in a dark place. So right next to your stove in a clear glass container is not a good place to keep oil. I keep mine in my cabinet. It's fairly close to my stove. It's kind of a turnaround carousel. It's already in a dark glass bottle, but it's away from the stove, convenient enough, but it's not going to get hot when I'm cooking something. Discarding the oils when they start to smell old or fishy is important. However, if you can't really recognize when it's old or fishy, you may need somebody else to assist you with this one. It's going to kind of smell like if you've ever smelled rancid nuts. Sometimes I've had pecans that have sat out too long and maybe I've forgotten to put in the refrigerator, and they smell off. They smell old. Another thing to do is to mark on the bottle label when you purchase the oil. Now, sometimes you can go ahead and you can open up a container of oil and it already smells like it's gone bad. But if you've opened it up and it's fresh, you may want to go ahead and just mark on the bottle label when you purchase it so that you don't put it away and think, I don't know when I bought this, and it ends up being 2 years since you bought it. That's probably already bad. More liquid oils tend to go rancid more easily. The saturated fats that are solid at room temperature are more stable for a long amount of time. So coconut oil keeps for a long, long time. I used to buy it in big 5-gallon bucket containers. Compare that with olive oil or even an avocado. Those are not going to last as long. You can store your liquid oils in the refrigerator if you'd like to, if you don't use oils very fast. It's going to become cloudy, but it's not going to affect the function of the oil, and it will preserve it for a little bit longer. So if you choose to invest in some high quality oils, that may be a good idea. I use some flax oil for my family. It comes in a dark brown container, but I still keep that in the refrigerator just to make sure it stays fresh. I've also bought some walnut and almond oil in the past. I keep those in the refrigerator as well. The things we want to be watching out for, particularly are processed polyunsaturated vegetable oils. Those would be things like corn, soy, canola, which I know that's one people have heard, oh, that's supposed to be a good oil for you. Cottonseed. There are a few others, but those are the main ones that I'm listing on right now. Usually anything that says vegetable oil on it, I'm going to stay away from. And one of the reasons is that these oils are typically highly processed. Soy oil, for instance, doesn't keep very long at all, even though in its original form it may have some benefits. So there's some places where I've used some components of soy oil for a client to help with a certain medical condition, but it has to be preserved very naturally. Oftentimes soy is turned into a hydrogenated oil. They're going to process it so that it becomes more like a saturated fat. That's what a trans fat is. They want that fat to act more like a saturated fat, so it becomes stable. So they change the chemical structure of it. Also, soy and corn and canola are genetically modified. So canola may say organic, but somewhere back in the chain, it's been genetically modified. And that means any type of genetically modified product has been and can withstand high amounts of pesticides without the plant itself dying. So they can spray high amounts of pesticides on the plants. The soybean or the corn will still withstand that. It won't die, but all the weeds around it will. These are often chemically processed, so I just stay away from these as much as possible. Sometimes I'll have something with a tiny amount of canola oil in it if I'm just trying to find a quick option for a specified time. Some people say you should never have it. I have it very occasionally. Sometimes people say, oh, canola oil is a good source of omega-3 fatty acids. I would really prefer to get the omega-3 fatty acids from another source. Of course, staying away from trans fats, which would be hydrogenated oils. Our government now requires companies to list the amount of trans fats on the label. But in order to get away from having to list trans fats on the label, the companies can modify what the serving size is of a food to make it so small that if it's less than 0.5 grams of trans fat in there, then they don't have to list it. So it's kind of a sneaky way to get some trans fat in without having to put that on the label. And then, of course, any rancid fats, anything that's already gone bad, you do not need to be eating. Your body really increases the oxidative stress upon your body. Your body has to use up its antioxidants to take care of that fat. Going to go a little bit more into cholesterol. And we think of fat along with cholesterol. Cholesterol is anything that comes from a mother, is what I learned in school. It's an animal product, dietary cholesterol. Now, our body makes cholesterol in the liver. So dietary cholesterol that comes from our food is completely different from cholesterol that we make in our liver. And just because we eat cholesterol doesn't necessarily mean we make cholesterol. So that's kind of a misconception that's been perpetuated out there for way too long. And I'm going to show some more recent studies that support what I'm saying. But we need cholesterol. It's a precursor, which is a building block for our male and female hormones. Things like serotonin, which is our landing gear neurotransmitter that helps us just calm down and handle stress. It's a precursor for vitamin D, for bile, which is that emulsifier, kind of like a laundry detergent that helps our body break down fats, which is interesting. We need cholesterol, part of fat, to break down fats. It also functions as an antioxidant, helps build our cell wall. We've already mentioned cell wall some today. So we need cholesterol for that and the function of our cell wall. Also important for neurotransmitter receptor signaling. So cholesterol does have a function in the body. We do not want to go without any cholesterol. In fact, having too low of cholesterol can be a problem for people. It can be a reason that someone may be struggling, a male with low testosterone levels, because their cholesterol is too low. Cholesterol is really harmful when it's oxidized or when it's damaged. You can kind of think about the fat we talked about earlier. When nuts or seeds or oils go bad, it goes rancid. That's a form of, it's damaged. Cholesterol is harmful when it's damaged. And in order to really optimize our cholesterol, we need to be looking at blood glucose and insulin levels. We need to be consuming an abundance of antioxidants. And we need to be adding in some protective omega-3 fatty acids, which we'll get to in a few minutes. We also, when I'm digging deeply with a client into cholesterol levels and what's going on, I really look at the particle size of their blood cholesterol panel, not just the overall levels of cholesterol. A lot of times when people come back from the doctor's office, they have just a few values. They have their HDL, they have their LDL, they have their total cholesterol. Maybe we'll have a little bit of a ratio, but we don't have as in-depth of values as I'm really looking for. I'm going to give you a quick example that when I am looking at a client, actually this is a very recent client I've had, who's a very young individual, unfortunately, and has a high family history of heart disease and diabetes. We see here that this arrow that's pointing to the first one, that pointing to the dense LDL, that is the size of the LDL particles, which is usually the undesirable cholesterol we don't want. Their LDL is small and dense. That particle size, it's like throwing marbles through a volleyball net versus throwing volleyballs. Those little marbles can cause a lot of damage to the cell wall compared to big fluffy particles, which really aren't going to be a problem. They're not going to damage the arterial wall. So I'm looking at particle size. Also looking down, this individual had a very high level of fasting insulin, which shows me high level of inflammation. Their C-reactive protein down here was very high, and this was actually taken after 3 months of working on an anti-inflammatory plan with me. So I cannot imagine what things would have been like beforehand, because I know that this individual's triglycerides, which are now at 146, had never been lower than 400 his entire life. So we're majorly improving heart health, but this is really heart attack waiting to happen in a few years with this type of particle size and low HDL levels. That's the happy levels of cholesterol. That was low. So it's a lot more than just LDL, HDL, and total cholesterol. I'm looking at a much bigger picture when I look at heart health and particle numbers. And then we also look at levels of omega-3 fatty acids in the blood. That impacts a lot of that particle size and the function of cholesterol. And when it's as low as this one is, we really have to bring that up. So a little bit more about cholesterol. The bottom line is I'm going to say eat the yolks, folks. There's a study that was just published in April of this year that was talking about 3 large studies of the review of this one in 50 countries and 6 continents that did not find any significant association between moderate egg intake, which is 1 egg a day, and then blood lipids, mortality, or major cardiovascular disease events. That is a big statement. Now, I do recommend more than 1 egg a day for many people, but we at least saw that with this one. We did not see a major association at all between cholesterol levels, risk of death, or major cardiovascular disease events. So this was done with a whole egg and studying the whole egg intake. So I have a lot of people who've come to me and said that their doctors say they should never eat the egg yolks. We need the egg yolks. And I'm going to go back for just a minute. Some of the studies show that even if an egg were to raise levels of LDL cholesterol, typically it also raises levels of HDL cholesterol. So it kind of goes up together. The good and the undesirable cholesterol both raise at the same time. So that's an interesting phenomenon there, like the body almost protecting itself the more we have. I know some of my colleagues who work with people who have cardiovascular disease from a functional nutrition standpoint, maybe recommending 15 to 17 eggs a week to impact cholesterol levels with people, because there's something called lecithin in the egg yolks that helps our body even process that cholesterol. It's just amazing to see the impact of a whole egg upon health. So we've already mentioned it's a great source of protein. You can go ahead and eat the yolks too. Talking about essential fatty acids, there are some that our bodies cannot synthesize as humans. We cannot make these. So these 2 would be linoleic acid, which is an omega-6, and then alpha linolenic acid. They kind of tend to seem like the same thing. One has an N in there, one doesn't. Alpha linolenic is an omega-3 fatty acid. Our body can make EPA and DHA from the ALA. I'm giving a lot of acronyms right now. Our body can make some of these important. So EPA and DHA is going to be very important for us to kind of keep in our mind. It's not very efficient for our body to do that though. And so that's why we are needing food and supplemental forms of the EPA and DHA. Primarily, we get those in fish oil. As a society, we do not usually consume many forms of EPA and DHA. DHA is found in a high amount in breast milk. So that's a big benefit for babies and brain development. But we don't eat a lot of fatty fish. We don't eat a lot of the foods that have that. And sometimes people have genetic reasons that they don't convert the baseline omega-3s into those important EPA and DHA. For instance, flax is one of those foods. Flax and walnut seeds, walnuts have omega-3 fatty acids in them, but it's not an animal form. Our body doesn't often convert those. We have to have high amounts of that to convert it over. So some people do well with that and some people don't. Typically, we are looking for a ratio of 2 to 1 when it comes to omega-6s to omega-3 fatty acids in the blood or in the diet as well. A typical Western diet is usually 10 to 1 or 25 to 1, so much heavier amount of omega-6s versus omega-3 fatty acids. So we're having to come in and supplement to help our body get back to a better ratio. So that's why I mentioned some of the, like the soy and the corn, such prevalent oils for our society. Just taking those out to begin with, which are very high sources of the omega-6s, can be a good starting point. Substituting that with like a coconut oil or an avocado oil or that kind of thing are going to help that ratio a little bit. We know that omega-3 fatty acids have the benefit of reduced inflammation, impact upon cardiovascular health, including particle size, brain development, mood enhancement, improved cognition, joint comfort, visual acuity. It really ties into eyesight, regulation of blood glucose. It impacts our gut health and muscle mass. I've even seen a study that just came out that I saw on Friday after our class. It was talking about the impact of omega-3 fatty acids and sarcopenia, or loss of muscle mass. And so kind of ties back to our protein power last week. We're more likely to be able to keep muscle mass if we have higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids in the body. So some of these nutrients that are tying in together, it's not just one thing here or there, but it's like the compounded effect of a lot of good nutrients that we need. Some of the studies that I've seen with omega-3 fatty acids in Parkinson's disease, there's not a lot, but there are some that we see an association between a diet rich in polyunsaturated omega-3 fats and a lower risk of Parkinson's disease. So that's before that's actually developed. But we also see some studies with treatment. So treatment of omega-3 fatty acids, they're kind of combine this in a study with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease or any other type of neurodegenerative diseases, recognizing this as a very safe treatment, safe tool to use. I'm not going to go through all the points here, but we also know that omega-3 fatty acids are very important for reducing inflammation. And we see a direct correlation between that and depressive symptoms. So it may not necessarily affect, well, I'm going to talk about another slide in a minute, whether or not we see an effect upon neurological symptoms like tremors and that type of thing. We do know that the other side effects that come along with Parkinson's disease and kind of side diagnoses. Depression is a major one that I've seen with so many people. Just getting good levels of omega-3 fatty acids in the blood is going to help with mood and how we feel so much that we can take care of ourselves better. So that's an important thing. We also see that one of the studies that patients, Parkinson's disease patients taking fish oil with or without antidepressants noticed an increase in depressive symptoms during the study duration. And this was a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. This is the gold standard of trials. Not that I have to have that to actually make an intervention, but in this trial, we know that fish oil, a good quality one, I would say, is going to show an improvement in depressive symptoms. But one other thing that I saw last night, and I was so excited I came across this one, and I just didn't get to explore it as much as I would have even. But previously studies had been saying that we did not necessarily see an influence on anything else, any type of actual Parkinson's disease symptoms with omega-3 fatty acids, but also the intake had been very low. They've been using maybe 500 milligrams in studies. I use often 3,000 milligrams with my clients, sometimes a little bit more. So this is the first study that I saw that had 1,000 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acids that was used. This was another randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial conducted with 60 patients with Parkinson's disease. I think this is men in Iran. So they compared that 1,000 milligrams of omega-3s to a placebo, had some vitamin E in there, probably to preserve that omega-3 fatty acid a little bit more. And they did note a significant improvement on a UPDRS scale. That would be a unified Parkinson's disease rating scale. This is going to rate a lot of different symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And I was looking at that scale last night. I thought, wow, if we could impact a lot of those with omega-3s, we've come a long way. Also improved laboratory inflammatory and oxidation markers, so things like glutathione, things like insulin sensitivity. So just really very interesting study to me. It was just done a few years ago, and I would really like to see some more of these studies done. Like if we were getting to therapeutic levels of omega-3s. We were using a fish oil. Flaxseed oil doesn't even necessarily have the best source of DHA. So if we could use a good quality fish oil and implement this with it at a good level, I'm very curious to see what we could do and the effects that we could have upon Parkinson's disease. I would really love to see that study come out. Maybe we should start it ourselves. And then let's see. We know that I'm going a minute over, but triglyceride form of fish oil is preferred to the ethyl ester form. Many of the fish oils that we see on our shelves are going to be in an ethyl ester form. That's a cheap way to produce fish oil. It's also what helps give you that nice fishy taste afterwards. But the triglyceride form preferred, it's 70% more absorbable. It's a more natural form of fish oil. So that's an important thing to look for when we're evaluating a fish oil. Also want to make sure that a fish oil has been independently tested for purity and removal of things like heavy metals, including mercury, which are very prevalent in our fish, pesticides, and then PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. So fish oil can very easily be contaminated. And I often tell my clients, unless you can invest in a good quality fish oil form, do not buy fish oil. Do not buy it from Walmart. Do not get it from Walgreens or your local drugstore. It is not worth it. It's going to do more harm than good for you. And that's why a lot of doctors say, I don't see any benefit of fish oil with my patients. I have so many people who've told me that. My doctor said I don't need to take fish oil. Well, probably so. The kind that people usually take really may not be of any benefit. But when we get to a good quality form of fish oil, that's where I see it really having a benefit. I see it impact levels of omega-3 fatty acids in the blood. I see it impact well-being of people and their symptoms. I've seen this very personally with a member of my family starting to take fish oil and impact upon, as an elderly individual, impact upon anxiety. Huge impact. We just saw very much of a calming influence after taking a good therapeutic amount of fish oil. Let me go back just a second. And there are 2 or 3 brands that I really like to use. One is my favorite in terms of actually impacting lab values, but I've seen some other ones, 2 or 3 other ones. And I will link those for you today if that's something you're interested in. I know that fish oil sometimes can be challenging. Typically the capsules are a little bit bigger. One thing that you may have to do is to puncture a capsule and put it into something like your yogurt or even on top of your food. You could have that on your oatmeal or a stir fryer a little bit just in a teaspoon and eat it along with your meal if you can't swallow a bigger capsule. I do have some tiny capsules that I use, but it's kind of expensive to buy because you have to buy so many to get the therapeutic dose. But I'd rather even have a small amount of a good fish oil if you can't invest in a small amount of a good fish oil versus a larger amount of one that's not as potent and as helpful for the body. Few things we had talked about: challenges for optimal protein digestion, also for fat, low stomach acid, inadequate bile flow, inadequate pancreatic enzyme production, and low pantothenic acid levels, which is one of our B vitamins. All these things can impact our fat digestion. So some of the things that we talked about for protein last week are going to also apply to fat. And we will talk about to keto or not to keto a little bit later on this week, because that's one of the things I have lots of questions about. And I think we're going to save that for a little bit later on. But this week we will be making some creamy guacamole, homemade almond milk, and some basil walnut pesto, which are delicious recipes. I can't wait to share these with you. Thanks for letting me chat for a little bit longer. I'm very excited about fats. I want to talk more about these. And I hope that you all have a wonderful week. And I'll see you in the kitchen on Wednesday. I'll leave the chat function up for just a minute today if anybody has any questions or anything you need to talk about right now.